In the gleaming marble lobby of Morrison Financial Holdings, Angela moves quietly, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor like a metronome, counting down to something extraordinary. The scent of fresh orchids and expensive cologne fills the air as executives in $1,000 suits rush past her without so much as a glance. No one knows that behind her modest appearance lies one of the sharpest financial minds on Wall Street. No one even notices the way she analyzes every quarterly report that crosses her desk, or how she quietly observes the company's strategic missteps from her corner workspace. But when CEO Marcus Thompson and his board members struggle with a hostile takeover threat that could destroy everything they've built, she listens. What they didn't know was that Angela Washington had been strategically positioning herself for this exact moment for 3 years. And with just one phone call to her private wealth management firm, she was about to change the entire power structure of the company forever. Because sometimes the person you underestimate the most holds all the cards. The morning sun streams through floor-to-ceiling windows as Angela organizes Marcus's calendar, her movements precise and deliberate. She's been his executive assistant for 3 years, invisible yet indispensable. The board members stride past her desk toward the conference room, their voices tense with worry. The Blackstone Group is moving fast, whispers CFO Jonathan Miller. To Marcus, they've acquired another 12%. We're looking at a complete hostile takeover within weeks. Angela's fingers pause over her keyboard. Blackstone Group. She knows them well, too well. Her dark eyes follow the group as they disappear behind frosted glass doors, their panic almost palpable. Miss Washington, Marcus's voice cuts through her thoughts, sharp with irritation. I need the Patterson files, and I need them now. This isn't the time for daydreaming. Of course, Mr. Thompson, she responds calmly, though something flickers behind her composed exterior. She retrieves the files with practiced efficiency, but as she places them on his desk, she can't help herself. Sir, if I may, she begins softly, regarding the Blackstone situation, have you considered a strategic counter-acquisition? If you could secure a significant ally with substantial holdings, Marcus barely looks up from his phone. Miss Washington, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but leave the corporate strategy to people who actually understand high finance. Just focus on keeping my schedule organized. The dismissal stings, but Angela simply nods. Understood, sir. As she returns to her desk, the weight of 3 years of casual dismissals, overlooked contributions, and subtle condescension settles on her shoulders. But today feels different. Today, the irony is almost too much to bear. Through the glass walls, she watches Marcus pace frantically during his emergency board meeting. The company her grandfather helped build, the company she's watched grow from the shadows, the company she's secretly been protecting all along, it's about to slip away from them. Her phone buzzes with a text from her private banker at Goldman Sachs. Angela, the quarterly dividends from your Morrison holdings are ready for review. Still maintaining radio silence on your 31% stake? 31%. More than any board member. More than Marcus himself. Enough to stop any hostile takeover dead in its tracks. She glances at the conference room where grown men in expensive suits scramble desperately for solutions they can't see. The same men who've treated her like an invisible fixture for years, who've never once asked for her opinion despite her MBA from Wharton and her decade of experience in corporate finance before she took this position. Angela closes her eyes and takes a deep breath. She thinks of her grandfather, William Washington, one of the founding partners of Morrison Financial, before institutional racism forced him out in the 1970s. She thinks of the promise she made at his deathbed to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Her hand hovers over her phone. One call, one simple call to her wealth management team, and she could save this company. She could reveal herself as the guardian angel they never knew they had. But first, they need to learn what it means to lose everything. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story of hidden power and justice, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that respect should be earned through character, not assumptions, smash that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell. I'm bringing you real stories of people who refuse to let others define their worth. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. On a scale of 0 to 10, how shocked are you that Angela has been hiding such a massive secret? Drop your number in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see your reactions. And if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you work, share your story below. This community is built on lifting each other up and recognizing the hidden strength in every person we meet. Angela Washington had worked at Morrison Financial Holdings for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She arrived each morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, prepared Marcus Thompson's coffee to perfection, 2 sugars, splash of cream, and managed his impossible schedule with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood the intricate machinery of corporate power. The marble floors gleamed under her sensible heels as she navigated between towering executives who walked by her as if she were part of the expensive furniture. The 42nd floor buzzed with the energy of billion-dollar decisions, mahogany-paneled offices filled with men who wore their authority like expensive cologne. But Angela watched. She always watched. Behind her wire-rimmed glasses and professional smile, she absorbed every conversation, every strategic meeting, every careless comment about market positions and acquisition targets. On that particular Tuesday morning, the emergency board meeting had stretched past noon, voices rising behind the soundproof glass of Conference Room A. Angela heard fragments through the intercom system, desperate discussions about leveraged buyouts, poison pills, and white knight scenarios. The company was hemorrhaging value, and Blackstone Group circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. "We need a miracle," she heard Jonathan Miller's voice crack with exhaustion. "Or we need someone with enough capital and influence to stand against them." Angela moved closer to the conference room, ostensibly to refill the water pitchers, but really to hear more. Those words weren't foreign to her. Corporate warfare, defensive strategies, market manipulation. This was the language she'd spoken fluently for over a decade before she'd walked away from it all. She whispered to herself, a strategic counterposition through existing shareholders could create a blocking coalition. Marcus emerged from the meeting, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his silk tie loosened in defeat. He noticed her nearby and snapped, "Angela, don't you have actual work to do instead of lurking around boardrooms? This is serious business, not gossip for the secretarial pool." The word secretarial hit like a physical blow, but Angela's expression never changed. She simply nodded with dignity and returned to her desk. But deep inside, something had stirred. Not just hurt, but a familiar fire she'd thought she'd extinguished years ago. That evening, in her modest Brooklyn apartment, Angela sat at her grandmother's antique writing desk, surrounded by framed photographs and memories of a different life. The leather portfolio in front of her bore the embossed logo of Wharton Business School. She opened it carefully, running her fingers over the MBA diploma dated 15 years earlier, summa cum laude, concentration in corporate finance and strategic management. The pages were full of recommendation letters from professors who'd called her exceptional, brilliant, and destined for greatness in the financial world. There were newspaper clippings from her early career. Young financial prodigy predicts market crash. Washington's hedge fund delivers 340% returns. Rising star in corporate America. Back then, Angela Washington had been the Angela Washington, the youngest black woman to ever lead a major acquisition team at Sterling Capital Management. She'd engineered hostile takeovers, defended against them, and made millions for her clients through strategic brilliance that bordered on artistry. The financial world had been her kingdom, and she'd ruled it with quiet confidence and devastating precision. But then came the call that changed everything. Her younger brother David, only 28, diagnosed with ALS. Her parents, aging and overwhelmed. The medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. The specialized care he needed. The promise she'd made to him in his hospital room. "I'll take care of you," she'd whispered. holding his hand as the machines beeped around them. Whatever it takes. The last time she touched that portfolio, she'd been liquidating her position at Sterling Capital, walking away from a partnership track and a seven-figure salary to become David's full-time caregiver. The financial world had seemed so important, so urgent, until suddenly it wasn't. Family was everything. Love was everything. Success could wait. For 2 years, she'd devoted herself entirely to David, managing his care, navigating the healthcare system, making his remaining time as comfortable as possible. When he passed peacefully in her arms, she'd been too emotionally drained to return to her old life. The corporate world felt hollow, competitive, cruel, after experiencing such profound loss and love. But this time, as she stared at her old achievements, Angela didn't cry. She turned to her laptop and started to research. Morrison Financial Holdings' current market position, Blackstone Group's acquisition strategy, the company's shareholder structure, and voting rights. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with muscle memory, pulling up financial databases and analysis tools she hadn't touched in years. There it is, she whispered to herself, studying the numbers that told the real story. It was always there. The irony was almost poetic. Marcus Thompson, the man who dismissed her intellectual contributions daily, had no idea he was sitting across from someone who could either save his company or destroy it with a single decision. The next morning brought no relief to the 42nd floor. Marcus Thompson emerged from his office before 8 a.m., his usually immaculate appearance showing cracks, his shirt collar slightly wrinkled, his jawline shadowed with stubble that suggested a sleepless night, the morning light streaming through. The glass walls seemed harsher somehow, illuminating the stress lines around his eyes as he barked orders into his phone. "I don't care if it's unconventional, Jonathan. Get me every option on the table by noon," he snapped, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. Defense strategies, poison pills, anything that can stop Blackstone from completing this acquisition, Angela observed from her workstation, her trained eye cataloging the subtle signs of a man watching his empire crumble. She'd seen it before. In her previous life, the particular brand of panic that seized executives when they realized they'd underestimated their opponents. The morning financial news played softly on the lobby monitors, and she caught fragments about Morrison's declining stock price and increased trading volume. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had grown electric with tension. The board members still lingered in emergency sessions, voices growing sharper with each passing hour. Through the intercom, Angela heard fragments of increasingly desperate conversations. "They've secured another 8% overnight," came Jonathan Miller's strained voice. "We're looking at a complete loss of control by Friday." "What about our institutional investors?" Marcus demanded. "Goldman Sachs? Morgan Stanley? Surely they won't abandon ship. They're staying neutral without a clear defensive strategy. Or a white knight investor. They won't choose sides." Angela's pulse quickened. White knight investor. The term hung in the air like a challenge. She knew exactly what they needed. Someone with significant holdings. Someone with the financial sophistication to understand the market dynamics. Someone who could rally other shareholders against the hostile takeover. Someone like her. Without thinking, she spoke up from her desk. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson. Have you considered reaching out to existing major shareholders who might have strategic reasons to oppose the takeover? Sometimes the most effective defense comes from building a coalition of current stakeholders rather than seeking external intervention." The conference room fell silent. Every head turned toward her, and Angela felt the familiar weight of being the only black face in a room full of white executives. But this time, she didn't shrink back. Marcus stepped out of the conference room, his expression a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "Miss Washington, I thought I made myself clear yesterday. Corporate strategy is not your domain. We're dealing with billion-dollar decisions here, not scheduling conflicts. I understand." "That, sir," Angela replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "I just thought that perhaps—" "Perhaps what?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "Perhaps someone with no business education or financial experience should tell a Harvard MBA how to run a Fortune 500 company. The insult hung in the air like acid smoke. Angela felt every eye in the room watching her, waiting to see if she'd crumble under the weight of his dismissal. She thought of her grandfather, William Washington, who'd faced similar dismissals 40 years ago when institutional racism was even more overt. She thought of David, who'd taught her about dignity in the face of impossible odds. "I apologize for overstepping," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Marcus shook his head and turned back toward the conference room. "Miss Washington, maybe it's time we discussed whether this position is the right fit for your skill set. Schedule a meeting with HR for this afternoon." The threat was unmistakable. After 3 years of perfect service, of managing his impossible demands and protecting his reputation, he was preparing to fire her. All because she'd dared to offer advice that came from years of experience he didn't know she possessed. Angela walked back to her desk, her movements careful and controlled. But inside, something fundamental was shifting. The hurt was still there, sharp and personal. But underneath it, a different emotion was rising. Not anger. She was beyond anger now. This was clarity. She opened her laptop and navigated to her secure banking portal. The numbers stared back at her in stark black and white. 31.3% ownership stake in Morrison Financial Holdings, accumulated quietly over 3 years through a complex web of shell companies and investment vehicles. Every quarterly dividend had been reinvested. Every stock dip had been an opportunity to increase her position. Her private banker had questioned the strategy initially. "Why maintain anonymity?" he'd asked during one of their quarterly reviews. "With holdings this substantial, you could demand board representation, influence company direction." "Patience," Angela had replied. "Sometimes the most powerful position is the one nobody sees coming." Now, watching Marcus frantically try to save a company she already controlled, she understood the profound irony of her situation. The man who was about to fire her for presuming to understand finance was desperately seeking the exact kind of help she could provide. Her phone buzzed with a text from her wealth management team. "Angela, Blackstone Group has increased their offer by 15%. Your holdings could be worth $180 million at current bid. Do you want us to explore exit strategies?" $180 million. More money than Marcus would see in his lifetime. More than enough to disappear, to build whatever life she wanted, to honor her grandfather's memory by succeeding beyond his wildest dreams. But that wasn't what William Washington had taught her. About justice. Angela closed the laptop and looked across the office at Marcus, who was gesturing frantically during another crisis call. She made her decision. It was time for Morrison Financial Holdings to meet its real owner. That evening, in her modest Brooklyn apartment, Angela sat in the familiar comfort of her grandfather's old leather chair, surrounded by the quiet ghosts of her family's history. The framed photograph on the side table showed a distinguished black man in a crisp 1960s suit, standing proudly in front of a small office building with Washington and Associates Financial Services painted in gold letters. Across the window, William Washington, her grandfather, the man who'd built something beautiful and had it taken away by a system that couldn't imagine a black man belonging in high finance. Angela opened the weathered manila folder she kept in her bedroom safe, documents her grandmother had pressed into her hands on her deathbed. "Promise me," her grandmother had whispered, "promise me you'll reclaim what they stole from our family." The first document was a partnership agreement dated 1968. Washington and Associates had been the junior partner in a merger with Morrison Financial Holdings, bringing innovative investment strategies and a roster of loyal clients to what was then a struggling mid-sized firm. William Washington's analytical brilliance had transformed Morrison from a regional player into a national powerhouse within 5 years. But success had made him dangerous to men who couldn't accept his excellence. The second document told the real story. Internal memos from 1973, obtained years later through a lawsuit settlement. "The Washington situation is becoming untenable," read one memo from Morrison's board. Clients are requesting him specifically. He's becoming the face of the company. This was never the arrangement. We need to find a way to minimize his influence. Without triggering discrimination claims, read another. Perhaps we can restructure the partnership terms. The restructuring had been elegant in its cruelty. New partnership agreements that diluted William's ownership, strategic exclusions from major client meetings, subtle campaigns to redirect credit for his innovations to white colleagues. They'd made his professional life so miserable that he'd eventually accepted a buyout for a fraction of what his partnership was worth, just to escape with his dignity intact. "They couldn't destroy my mind," William had told young Angela during one of their Saturday afternoon talks. "They couldn't make me less brilliant, but they could make the cost of being brilliant too high to bear." He'd spent his remaining years teaching economics at a community college, nurturing young minds and dreaming of a day when merit would matter more than melanin. He'd made Angela promise to excel, to learn everything she could about the world that had rejected him. "One day," he'd said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "maybe you'll be in a position to show them what a Washington can really do when they're not looking." Angela traced her finger along the third document, her grandfather's original financial projections for Morrison, written in his precise handwriting. His strategic vision had been decades ahead of its time, predicting market trends and demographic shifts that didn't become obvious until the 1990s. If his ideas had been fully implemented, Morrison Financial would have been worth billions by now instead of merely millions. The fourth document was her grandmother's insurance settlement from the discrimination lawsuit. Not enough to restore their wealth, but sufficient to fund Angela's education at Wharton. "Use this to get inside their world," her grandmother had said. "Learn how they think, learn how they operate, then decide what justice looks like." Angela had excelled beyond even William's dreams, but she'd always planned to use her success to honor his memory in a different way. She'd intended to build her own financial empire, to prove that Washington brilliance could thrive independently. The hostile takeover had been about reclaiming family honor, not family property. But then David got sick, and her priorities shifted to love instead of justice. She'd stepped away from her career to care for him, accepting that some promises might remain unfulfilled. It was only after David's death, when grief had left her emotionally exhausted and professionally adrift, that the opportunity had presented itself. Marcus Thompson had been looking for an executive assistant, someone smart enough to handle complex responsibilities, but invisible enough not to threaten his authority. The irony had been too perfect to resist. Working at Morrison as Angela, the assistant while secretly becoming Angela, the major shareholder, had felt like the universe offering her a chance to complete her grandfather's story. Every stock purchase had been a quiet act of reclamation. Every dividend had been proof that Washington wisdom could triumph over Washington wounds. For 3 years, she'd watched Marcus benefit from innovations and strategies that echoed her grandfather's original vision: investments in emerging markets, emphasis on diverse client portfolios, focus on long-term relationships over short-term gains. The company had prospered using the same principles William Washington had championed 50 years earlier, but without anyone recognizing the source of their success. Now, with Blackstone Group threatening to destroy everything, Angela faced a choice that would define not just her future, but her family's legacy. She could remain invisible and let the company fall, proving that justice sometimes meant watching the undeserving lose what they'd taken. Or she could reveal herself and save Morrison Financial, transforming it into the inclusive, innovative powerhouse her grandfather had always envisioned. Angela closed the folder and looked at her grandfather's photograph. His eyes seemed to twinkle with anticipation. "What would you do, Grandpa?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer came to her like his voice across the decades. "I'd show them what a Washington looks like when she's done hiding." The corporate headquarters was still draped in pre-dawn darkness when Angela stepped out of her Uber at 5:30 a.m. The security guard, Marcus, nodded sleepily as she badged herself through the lobby turnstiles. Just another early arriving assistant preparing for another crisis-filled day. He had no way of knowing that the woman in the modest business suit and sensible heels was about to execute one of the most sophisticated financial maneuvers in the company's history. She entered the 42nd floor through the executive elevator, her keycard granting her access to areas that most people assumed she visited, only to deliver coffee and organize meetings. The executive floor was silent except for the soft hum of climate control and the distant rumble of street traffic far below. No hesitation. Angela walked directly to Marcus's office and seated herself at his desk, opening her laptop and connecting to the secure financial networks she hadn't touched in years. Her fingers moved with practiced precision across the keyboard, accessing trading platforms and communication systems that required the kind of authorization only major shareholders possessed. First, she initiated a series of block purchases through her shell companies, not enough to trigger immediate disclosure requirements, but sufficient to bring her holdings to exactly 34.7% of outstanding shares. The purchases were timed to occur in pre-market trading, appearing as natural institutional investment rather than coordinated acquisition. Second, she activated dormant relationships with 3 other significant shareholders, pension funds, and investment groups who'd bought Morrison stock based on her private recommendations over the past 2 years. A series of encrypted messages went out through secure financial communication channels. Blackstone Group represents strategic risk to long-term value. Recommend defensive coalition. Details to follow. Third, she prepared the document that would change everything. A formal shareholder proposal demanding an emergency board meeting, signed by entities representing 47.3% of Morrison Financial's outstanding shares. Under corporate bylaws, the board would have no choice but to convene within 48 hours. When she finished, Angela looked at the screen displaying her handiwork. The market dynamics had shifted completely in less than 2 hours of work. Blackstone Group's hostile takeover had just become mathematically impossible. She controlled enough shares to block any acquisition attempt, and her coalition controlled enough to dictate the company's strategic direction. There was nothing left to say. She quietly logged off and left Marcus's office exactly as she'd found it. At 9:15 a.m., the financial markets opened with unusual activity around Morrison Financial Holdings. Trading volume spiked immediately as institutional investors recognized the overnight shift in shareholder positions. By 9:30, financial news networks were running breaking news alerts about mysterious coordinated trading activity and potential white knight intervention. Marcus arrived at his office to find his phone ringing non-stop and his computer screen filled with urgent messages from his broker, his lawyer, and his board members. His first call was to Jonathan Miller, the CFO. "What the hell is happening?" Marcus shouted into his phone. "Bloomberg is saying someone just acquired massive holdings overnight. Who is it? Goldman Sachs? Morgan Stanley? We don't know yet." Jonathan's voice crackled with excitement and confusion. The purchases came through multiple entities, shell companies, investment vehicles, pension funds. Whoever orchestrated this is sophisticated enough to mask their identity while staying just under disclosure requirements. How much are we talking about? Combined with their coalition partners, nearly 50% of outstanding shares. Marcus, this is it. This is our white knight. Blackstone Group just became irrelevant. Marcus sank into his chair, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and bewilderment. But who would do this? Who even has this kind of capital and influence? His computer chimed with an email from the corporate secretary's office. Emergency board. Meeting requested by major shareholders. Required response within 24 hours. The email included a list of the requesting entities and their shareholding percentages. Marcus stared at the numbers, trying to process the implications. Whoever had saved his company wielded more power than he did. They could demand board seats, strategic changes, even his removal as CEO. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Thompson, I believe we need to discuss your company's strategic direction. I'll be in touch shortly to arrange a meeting." A concerned shareholder. Within minutes, the story hit financial news networks. Morrison Financial Holdings experiences dramatic overnight ownership shift. The morning business shows featured financial experts speculating about the identity of the mysterious White Knight who'd appeared from nowhere to block Blackstone Group's hostile takeover. "This is unprecedented," said one CNBC analyst. "Someone with enormous financial resources and sophisticated market knowledge executed a textbook defensive strategy. Whoever this is, they've just become one of the most powerful players in the financial services sector overnight." The entire building buzzed with speculation and relief. Employees who'd feared for their jobs gathered in break rooms and hallways, whispering about their mysterious savior. Stock prices stabilized and then began climbing as investors recognized that Morrison Financial was no longer a takeover target, but a company with committed, engaged ownership. Angela sat at her assistant's desk, calmly organizing Marcus's schedule for the day, watching the controlled chaos unfold around her. Her phone displayed a secure message from her wealth management team. "Extraordinary execution. The financial press is calling it the Morrison Miracle. When do you want to reveal yourself?" "Soon," she texted back. "Very soon." The investigation began within hours. Marcus had hired the most expensive corporate attorneys in New York, determined to identify the mysterious investor who'd saved his company, but now wielded unprecedented power over his future. By Thursday afternoon, they'd traced the shell companies and investment vehicles back to a single source, AM Washington Capital Management, LLC. AM Washington, Marcus repeated, staring at the name on the legal documents spread across his conference room table. "Never heard of them. Must be some West Coast firm or international investor." His lead attorney, Patricia Stone from Cravath, Swain and Moore, adjusted her reading glasses and flipped through the incorporation documents. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, AM Washington Capital is registered here in New York. The managing partner is listed as," she paused, checking the name twice, "Angela Marie Washington." Angela Washington. Marcus frowned. That name sounds familiar. Jonathan Miller, who'd been quiet during most of the legal briefing, suddenly sat up straighter. "Marcus, isn't that your assistant's name? Angela Washington?" The room fell silent. Marcus grabbed the documents from Patricia's hands, scanning them frantically. Date of birth matched. Social Security number matched. Address listed as Brooklyn, New York. Exactly where he'd sent Christmas cards for the past 3 years. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "She's a secretary. She answers phones and schedules meetings. She couldn't possibly—" "Mr. Thompson," Patricia interrupted gently, "according to these documents, Ms. Washington has been the beneficial owner of 31.3% of Morrison Financial Holdings for the past 3 years. As of yesterday's trading, she now owns 34.7% of your company. She's your largest shareholder." Marcus stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the quiet, efficient woman who'd prepared his coffee every morning with the financial mastermind who'd orchestrated one of the most sophisticated defensive strategies in recent corporate history. "Get her in here," he said quietly. "Now." 20 minutes later, Angela sat across from Marcus in conference room A, her grandfather's worn leather portfolio resting on the polished mahogany table. She wore the same professional demeanor she'd maintained for 3 years, but something fundamental had shifted in her posture. She no longer carried herself like someone seeking approval. "You want to know who I am," she said calmly, before Marcus could speak. "So, I'll tell you." She opened the portfolio and withdrew her Wharton MBA diploma, placing it carefully on the table. Then came the newspaper clippings from her days at Sterling Capital Management, the recommendation letters, the awards for financial innovation and strategic excellence. "My name is Angela Marie Washington. I graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School with concentrations in corporate finance and strategic management. Before I became your assistant, I was a senior partner at Sterling Capital Management, where I engineered 17 successful acquisitions and defended against 12 hostile takeovers." Marcus's jaw dropped. Jonathan Miller leaned forward, studying the documents with growing amazement. "I left Sterling Capital to care for my younger brother, who was dying of ALS. Angela continued, her voice steady but carrying deep emotion. David needed full-time care, and I made a promise to him that family would always come first. When he passed away 2 years ago, I was emotionally drained and professionally adrift. I needed time to heal, to figure out what came next. She pulled out the weathered manila folder containing her grandfather's documents. But this story began long before I was born. My grandfather, William Washington, was one of the founding partners of Morrison Financial Holdings in 1968. His analytical brilliance and innovative strategies transformed this company from a regional firm into a national powerhouse. Angela's voice gained strength as she continued. He was forced out in 1973 through a campaign of institutional racism and strategic exclusion. The same minds that built Morrison's foundation were deemed too threatening to remain part of its leadership. He died knowing that his contributions had been erased from company history. She looked directly at Marcus, her dark eyes blazing with quiet intensity. I didn't come here seeking revenge, Mr. Thompson. I came here seeking understanding. I wanted to see the company my grandfather helped build, to understand what had become of his legacy. Working as your assistant allowed me to observe Morrison from the inside, to see how business was conducted, how decisions were made. And buying stock? Jonathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Every dividend was reinvested. Every market dip was an opportunity. I used the same analytical frameworks my grandfather developed 50 years ago, refined through my own experience in corporate finance. I never intended to become your largest shareholder. It happened gradually, organically, as I recognized the company's true potential. Angela leaned forward slightly. I didn't reveal my holdings because I was curious to see how Morrison's leadership would handle a crisis. Would you seek innovative solutions? Would you value expertise, regardless of its source? Would you demonstrate the kind of inclusive thinking that could take this company to the next level? The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process the complete reversal of everything he'd believed about their relationship. I didn't leave finance, Mr. Thompson, Angela said softly. Finance never left me. I just had to step away for love. But love doesn't diminish expertise. It deepens it. In that quiet conference room, they finally saw Angela Washington not as the invisible assistant who'd served their needs for 3 years, but as the financial genius who'd been protecting their company from the shadows all along. The next morning, Angela stepped into Morrison Financial Holdings exactly as she had every day for 3 years. But the atmosphere had transformed overnight. Word of her true identity had spread through the building like electricity, carried by whispered conversations and urgent text messages between colleagues who were struggling to reconcile their preconceptions with reality. As she walked through the marble lobby, conversations stopped mid-sentence. The security guard who'd nodded at her casually for years now stood a little straighter, offering a respectful, "Good morning, Ms. Washington," instead of his usual grunt. The elevator operators, the maintenance staff, the junior analysts, everyone seemed to be seeing her for the first time. But the real change was visible on the executive floor. As Angela approached her former workspace, she found Marcus standing. Beside her desk, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment, awe, and genuine remorse. Behind him stood the entire senior leadership team, Jonathan Miller, Patricia Stone, and half a dozen other executives who'd walked past her for years without acknowledgement. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of climate control. Then, slowly, Marcus began to clap. The applause spread through the room like a wave, tentative at first, then building into something powerful and sustained. Other employees emerged from their offices, drawn by the sound, until the entire executive floor was filled with people applauding the woman they'd overlooked. "Ms. Washington," Marcus said, when the applause finally faded, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond words. We all do. You saved this company, and more than that, you did it while we were treating you with a disrespect that I'm ashamed to acknowledge." Angela accepted his words with grace, but without surrender. "Mr. Thompson, Respect isn't something that can be retroactively granted. It's either present from the beginning or it reveals character flaws that need to be addressed systematically later. That morning, the board of directors convened an emergency session to formalize what everyone now understood. Angela Washington would be offered an executive position commensurate with her shareholding and expertise. But she had conditions. "I'll accept the role of Chief Strategic Officer," she announced to the assembled board members, "under one condition. Morrison Financial Holdings will implement the most comprehensive diversity and inclusion program in the financial services industry. We'll actively recruit talent from underrepresented communities, we'll establish mentorship programs for young professionals of color, and we'll create pathways for advancement that are based purely on merit and potential." The board agreed unanimously, though Angela suspected their enthusiasm was motivated as much by fear of her shareholding power as by genuine commitment to change. But the real vindication came 3 weeks later, when Angela stood at the podium. In Morrison's main auditorium, addressing the entire company for the first time as their Chief Strategic Officer. The room was packed beyond capacity, with employees standing along the walls and watching via video conference from other locations. She, too, looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, many genuinely excited about the changes she represented. Near the back of the room, she noticed several young Black and Latino employees who joined the company in junior positions, their eyes bright with hope and possibility. "3 weeks ago, many of you learned my name for the first time," Angela began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium speakers. "But I've been watching you, learning from you, and believing in Morrison's potential for years. Today, I want to share a vision for what this company can become when we fully embrace the talent and perspectives of every person who walks through our doors." She clicked to her first slide, a photograph of her grandfather standing proudly in front of his original office in 1968. "This is William Washington, one of Morrison's founding partners and my grandfather. His strategic vision helped build the foundation of everything we've accomplished here. Today, we're going to honor his legacy by becoming the company he always dreamed we could be." Angela outlined her comprehensive plan, establishing partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities, creating internship programs for underrepresented students, implementing blind resume reviews to eliminate unconscious bias, and establishing clear metrics for advancement based on performance, rather than proximity to power. "Excellence has no color," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Innovation has no gender. Brilliance has no accent. Our job is to create an environment where talent can flourish, regardless of where it comes from or what it looks like." The auditorium erupted in sustained applause, but Angela wasn't finished. "I want every person in this room to understand something fundamental. The next time you encounter someone whose expertise doesn't match your expectations, pause. Ask questions. Listen. Because the person you underestimate today might be the person who saves your company tomorrow." As she looked out at the crowd, Angela's eyes found Marcus in the front row. He was applauding too, his expression transformed from the dismissive arrogance she'd endured for 3 years to something that looked remarkably like humility. The entire room stood. Thunderous applause filled the auditorium as Angela Washington, no longer the invisible assistant, but the visionary leader she'd always been, took her rightful place at the helm of the company her grandfather had helped create. 6 months later, Angela Washington sat in the corner office that had once belonged to Marcus Thompson, not because she'd demanded it, but because the board had insisted that the company's largest shareholder and chief strategic officer deserved the space that reflected her true position. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as she reviewed quarterly reports that told a remarkable story of transformation. Morrison Financial Holdings had not only survived the Blackstone Group's hostile takeover attempt, it had thrived. Under Angela's leadership, the company had recruited talent from 12 historically Black colleges and universities, established the William Washington Fellowship Program for aspiring financial professionals, and implemented what industry publications were calling the gold standard for inclusive corporate leadership. The financial results spoke for themselves. A 37% increase in client satisfaction, a 42% improvement in employee retention, and innovations in emerging market investment strategies that had earned Morrison recognition as Financial Services Company of the Year by 3 major industry organizations. But the real transformation was visible in the faces of the young professionals who now walked the halls with confidence, knowing that their ideas would be heard and their contributions valued. Angela had kept her promise to create pathways for advancement based purely on merit and potential. Marcus Thompson had remained as president of operations, a role that suited his operational skills while acknowledging the new reality of corporate leadership. To his credit, he'd embraced the changes with genuine enthusiasm, becoming one of Angela's most effective advocates for systemic change throughout the financial services industry. "I learned something profound from Angela," Marcus had said during a recent industry conference. "Brilliance doesn't announce itself with expensive suits or Ivy League accents. Sometimes it sits quietly at the desk next to yours, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize it." As Angela finished reviewing the quarterly reports, her assistant, a bright young woman named Keisha, who was studying for her MBA through the company's educational support program, knocked gently on the door. "Ms. Washington, your 3 p.m. meeting with the William Washington Foundation Board is confirmed. They're excited to discuss expanding the scholarship program to include entrepreneurship mentoring." Angela smiled, thinking of her grandfather's photograph that now hung prominently in the main lobby, accompanied by a plaque that read, "William Washington, founding partner and visionary. His dreams live on." Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly in boardrooms and builds equity one strategic decision at a time. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to let anyone else's limitations define your worth. And sometimes the person they underestimate today becomes the leader who transforms their tomorrow.